Yeah. Chapter 12 is about audits and having checks and balances within your organization. And even if in that organization there's sometimes there's not the possibility of checks and balances. There's not in small companies, there's just not. One of the things I was showing you is that I went through and looked at that SP file with the database console once I had made those changes in chapter 12. And I have these on Blackboard, and I need to go back and look at them again. There were, when you get down to the end, there was 37 rows in that audit, in that system audit file table. Okay, one of the things, so we go on to 13, and that's maintenance, and I do have my file here where I had started, but I tried to open that several times, and it told me that it just couldn't open it, and I've got to go back and see why. I hope I can open the one on my desk, because I had spent a little bit of time with that. Now, I do have a couple of screenshots from that very first lab, and I was showing this a while ago, not meaning to, but show you the SP file. A couple of screenshots where I did do that first lab and got it going in chapter 13. Chapter 13 is showing you how to use really the automatic things that you have opportunity to use. A optimizer. There's product statistics with the optimizer. What this says is what chapter 6 says in network security. It says that if you assess your risk before any threat happens and you put into place controls to prevent that threat, then you should have an easier time with it. And that's exactly what this says. There's two words right at the beginning of chapter 13, reactive and proactive. You guys know who Stephen Covey is, don't you? The 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. You might be too young, but he was a guy. His book was sold millions when it came out. And one of those habits of highly successful people is to be proactive. And then that means that you try to do it before the bad thing happens. We had this discussion. I had this discussion with one of my students in that class. He believes Windows, the new versions of Windows from 7, 8, 10 have virus protection installed. You know that, right? Called the Windows Defender. Well, do you feel like I do, that you want to have additional virus protection even though that's there? I just didn't, I didn't trust it from the beginning. And maybe it's just me being leery. But this one student said it's always worked. It doesn't have any problem. Does it have any additional virus protection? I can't imagine just using that Windows Defender. But anyway, I'm proactive in that. I would have 3 or 4 on there if they would let me. In that class, we're discussing firewalls stuff. I called my ISP and wanted information about my firewall that the ISP provides. And of course, they won't give you very much because they think you're a hacker when you're calling them, I think. But to be proactive, and that's what this does. So it's about analyzing, and it does have some of the things set up by default, but some of them not. It tells us right at the beginning that gathering these statistics will not help improve PLSQL, because those include calls to SQL, but that statistics are important. So analyzing a table gathers stats for the number of rows, the number of blocks, the ones that are used and never used, the amount of free space, the average length of each row, the number of chained rows, or the rows that cut across blocks because they're long or because they have poor storage. Then on each column of the table, now that looks at the rows, on each column is the number of distinct values, the highest and lowest values of the column. I don't know why you would do that. Just to get a range, to have a range of columns and of values in a particular column, the number of nulls, and then the average column length. When the table is analyzed, the indexes are also analyzed. They are shown, and it tells you that these are three separate tables that this is stored in. The DBA table, the DBA tab columns table, and then last the index table. The depth of the index tree and the number of distinct key values. The clustering, how closely the natural order of rows follows the order of the keys. So these, and that's what, when you look at the lab, you can see on any particular table these statistics. The index stat table is the number referring to, do you know what that word means, extant? It means existing, right? So, and then there's an index on the deleted rows. So if you're looking at this stat, that really gives you a view of history, because the table itself, now in its current state, wouldn't have those deleted rows. So if you needed for some reason to see that information, then that's another table. So right at the very beginning of this chapter, it's showing us how to look at three different views. A view is the snapshot of the table at that time, right? Is what the view is. A virtual table is what it is. The snapshot at that time. So we're looking at optimizing statistics on each one of those things. When rows are deleted, the index keys remain. Now, I learned this really with Access several years ago. With Access, now it does now, but with Access, it really didn't want you to delete any rows in the earlier versions. But what they ended up doing then, the rows themselves are deleted when it's really required that row be deleted. Like Dwayne was telling us about the work he's doing as an intern with the obvious data being wrong, just delete those. The index stays though. In Access, you can have a primary key that's an auto number. You remember that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sequential numbering of the records. When you use that, then when you delete a row, that number's just not there. It's in the index, but it just doesn't show up in your table. So in addition to the table statistics, the index and column statistics are in the DBA indexes, and then they are gathered when you analyze a table. Analyzing a index populates the index stats table or view. The statistics are static, which means they're out of date because operations still are applied to the table. You can analyze, use the analyze command, or you can execute procedures in that package through the database control. So this is two ways that you can do manual statistics. And I did start my own. I like my own study guide, the way I do it, because I read the chapter real carefully and do my list the way I like to do so I can quickly see it. You're doing manual statistics gathering. And you can do it in the command line, or you can do it with database control using that particular PL SQL package. So it has you to analyze the table, and then the keywords compute statistics tells it to analyze the whole table and not just a portion of it. So if it's a large table, that could take a really long time. So a row is inserted, the statistics hadn't been updated, so sometimes it does require you to do it more than one time. I showed you my handout, my labs. No, that's my SP file after chapter 12. Wait just a second. It shows that this is the retention center for the advisor, and that's what it's called. There's several. When you go through here, you'll see that there's several different advisors. Those advisors have been doing, is the code that does the statistics gathering. This, the retention is set for every 15 minutes. It is, the analysis tells you when the time, and you can set this for the time period that you want to do it for, so that it'll do it automatically, but then it shows you where you can do it manually. You can run the statistics on that manually. I may have to stop. I wanted to try to get through to at least the first 2 labs in chapter 13 today. So you're gathering statistics. The analyze command is easy, but is limited to has limited functionality. In the DB control, it has more options and is the recommended tool. This shows you the code to how to gather statistics from the user tables. It inserts a row, and then it goes back and shows you that that has been updated. So object statistics, the object being the tables or the views, they're not real time. They're static until they're refreshed with a new analysis. If it's not done with quick enough, they can be out of date unless you set that to go along with your work performance of your company, right? How often would you need that, right? Gathering statistics, it will improve performance. It does put a strain, so that's another thing that you might set that at or run that at an off hour when there's not a lot of users. So how often should they be gathered? And what portion of the objects needs to be analyzed to get a true picture, an accurate picture? So, like I said, if it's a large table, it can put a strain on the database. The stats procedures can take many arguments depending on how much you want to analyze. Now it shows us here, and it says that when you're using the database control, configuration assistant, automatic statistics has been gathered as a job managed by the scheduler. It has a wizard, and that is the function, gather schema stats. It has the name of the schema, the cascade that will analyze the indexes as well as the tables, the percent of the controls, how much of the table you analyze. You know, when we look at how much of the table to analyze, and Dwayne's doing this in his intern company, one of the things that tables require is to be updated with current information. They really do. It just stands to reason that old records don't need to be there. And that's part of maintaining the database itself. To me, that before you get to this part right here, the tables themselves need to be cleaned up. In a large company, that's probably somebody's job. I'd like to know at SNEED, right? How long is that wait? If a student, and students do, I promise you, they hadn't been here in 7 years and all of a sudden they're back. They come back. They worked a while, maybe they got laid off, or maybe they moved and they moved back to the area. All kinds of things happen. But how often does that data need to come out? How often? Because SNEED's been here 100 years, over 100 years. So anyway, those are business policies, right? Business analyst policies. So how much of the table do you need to analyze? Do you know what happens in Facebook? You can't delete yourself. Did you know that? You cannot delete yourself. You can, what do they call it? What do they call that? You can make yourself not visible. And I can't remember right now what they call it. But you can't ever delete your record. No matter how long you've been not visible to the world, to your world in that social media, when you put yourself back visible, everything's just like it was. So, I guess I don't know what I'm trying to say, but managing the users. It says that make an intelligent guess at the moment needed for a meaningful sample. The degree, how much it will be with the parallel processes, the site, the number, the invalidate, replace any SQL or reparse any SQL that are still being, maybe being running or scheduled to run at a particular time. Some of those PLSQL functions are those kinds of functions. They're update and delete kind of functions, so that on any given day, in a company, there's certain PLSQL functions that are ran just for maintenance kinds of things. I hadn't, but one of the things that I wanted to look at is that PLSQL has so many functions, but they are functions that are done for this, that are done for the maintenance of the database. I wanted to look and see if how many of them were for that maintenance kind of things. Okay. So this is showing you the using database control, the enterprise manager. That stats on the HR schema to do the auto cascade to get a automatic sample size, to not do an auto validate for all the columns, and to gather stale. Is gather stale? I don't know what that actually means. I didn't look to see. How best to analyze the objects considering the number of sub-objects. The table being divided into however many partitions it had to be divided in, depending on its size. And then there's a method option that allows you to build a history chart on how you can let Oracle decide on how you want that to look, how you, the distributions of the values of the data that's in there in that history. And then the options. Let's analyze all options that Oracle considers the statistics to be out of date. So 13.2 is showing us, that's what that's saying. That is showing us how the code would actually look. So how frequently do you run it? And we've mentioned that. I wanted to look at my... Okay, there's the automatic undo management, and I showed you that it was set for 7 days. And then the automatic workload repository, that is 8 days and every 60 minutes. Did you show? Now, I ran this yesterday afternoon, so it's showing the next snapshot capture time. I don't know, maybe my file would tell me when I actually did that, but that's at 1 o'clock. The earliest snapshot then was the 8 days before that. So that's the first lab out of this chapter, or part of the first lab. The visibility of statistics by that parameter, basic, typical, and all. And when I read this, typical gathers all the statistics that a normal human should need. It will make the database run slower. Basic cripples you until it's done. All should be enabled just for short periods when you're actively tuning, actively running. So that shows you that you've got 3 possible settings for that statistics level parameter, how you're going to do that. And I was going to look back and see how that was. So this lab, I can't remember. I didn't time myself. But let me just stop on 13.1. I'm having just a little bit of trouble keeping talking. And let's run that one. To me, we're coming into like I said, the most important chapters. The maintenance is to get it set up the way you want it to set up, and then you would have to do periodic checks, but let it do as much statistics gathering as it can. Maybe key you for things that need to be upgraded and things like that. I'm going to stop, and we're going to work on lab 13.1.